There's not a lot of you here, but you're all really, like us. May says quality over quantity. I'm going to do really, really quick because there's not a lot of people here. Silent auction is May 13th. Most of the faces I see here are already involved, but, continue to be involved. Things that we're looking for that I keep forgetting. Donations. If we have big donations, we've got a couple. We've got the orthodontist. I think we got a big Phillies box for like 18 people. So we've got some fun things, but we could use a beach house, or if you got theater tickets, football tickets, anything like that, or somebody that does. I'm still looking for that. And gift cards. Today, a parent who works on Passyunk Avenue came up with, she's going to get restaurants from the avenue to donate no, not a basket, like a entree or an appetizer, and she's going to serve them in the garden on Passyunk Avenue and make it a garden party and present it as like an auction item that way, which I was like, great. She came up with it on her own. So I've been encouraging people to kind of be creative. I mean, I'm like, that'll be great. Who wouldn't love to be, 10 of your friends sit in the garden of Passyunk and have them eat a flavor all over the avenue. So be creative, and if you have anything kind of neat like that, I was saying the show bears always do house painting. So that, if you have a service that you can provide, people love it. And then camps, we're low on camps. I don't know if any of you guys use camps. If you go to a camp, you've been going for a long time, maybe ask them. We may have already asked them, and you could double check if you want to, but ask. And then Rosie's here. She is our parent board rep. We are looking for a new parent board rep. I don't know how ready we are for that, but maybe she can speak a little to what the job is, what we're looking for, and what you'll be expected to do if you would like to apply for that position.
Yeah, think about applying. So I'm just sending my first year as a parent board rep. There will be information coming out soon. We send out the job description, what it entails. Should I reread today? Even though, from last year. So it entails attending as many of the board meetings as possible. It's kind of neat to be on the board as a parent because not everyone on the board is a parent at the school. So it's a really cool opportunity to help not only the board engage with the parents in the school, but vice versa. Like I can do this meeting and then at the board meeting next week, be your voice, be the parent's voice, and often my own parent voice is, take advantage. Can't hurt. And so we'll have information coming out shortly to nominate yourself or nominate someone you know. And then there'll be a timeline for that person to submit their resume and some information about themselves. All these guidelines will be clear and communicated at the entire school. And then from there, timeline works where the first nomination will take place. You have a parent board rep and they join the first June board meeting, is where, between now and June, how this will happen. Are there any questions about that?
Okay, it's all neat ways to be engaged, though. It's amazing what you find out. I said I will be retiring as PTA president this year. I've learned so much, not only about myself, but our faculty, our staff, our teachers, the connection between the parents and the board and our teachers. It's what makes this such a special place. So to be able to participate in that and have a voice in that is really special. I think unique. Not every school has such a great open relationship, and just a great way to challenge yourself and grow a little bit. Which we're never too old for that, I'm learning. Okay, so I'm going to get off and let these guys get started.
So while we pull this up, I just wanted to let everybody know who's here. We have Counselor Miriam, our lower school counselor, and AP Renee, Teacher Siobhan, Teacher Jody is our special ed coordinator, Teacher Nikki is our student support specialist, and Counselor Ann is our middle school counselor. And then Jenny's also, everybody knows Jenny. As she said, people imprint on her because she helps them with enrollment, and then they never know who Teacher Jenny is. So I wanted to tell you there's a lot of different things planned, so I'm going to just read out what we have, and if you can just shout out the thing that you are most interested in. We'll still go through them, but then it helps me know what you're most interested in hearing about. So we would start with the discipline approach. our three-tier framework for behavioral interventions, bullying prevention and protocol, behavior in students with disabilities, culturally responsive practices and equitable discipline, and then tools for talking to your child about other students' behavior. Is there anything that stands out to anyone that you definitely want to spend more time on?
I would say the bottom part of that for me, the last two are, I think are really important with our kids and our adults.
Okay.
That they
There's
say.
agreement with that?
Yes.
Bullying, I hear.
Yes.
So we planned the perfect presentation for everybody. Okay. What were you going to say, Amy?
Definitely about the culturally responsive practices and bullying.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Can someone, I did not bring my pointer. Is there someone that can, thanks.
You like click for you?
Yes.
Okay, you just gotta tell me what to click.
Very good. Just the arrow one. So these are just, I won't spend a lot of time on the screen, it's obviously lots of writing, but these are the belief statements that are on our website. And I shared with staff this year that I really wanted to focus on our first belief statement, which is that we believe that all children can be successful in a safe, nurturing, and respectful environment, which is really hard anywhere, but it's definitely hard in a diverse school where safe, nurturing, and respectful looks different for many different students. That was my attempt at it. Thanks for being in. Oh, okay. That was a blank slide, so you can go ahead. Okay, so can you just go all the way through each one of these? So our approach is that we, this year in particular, we are really focusing on providing more tools for all staff to effectively address misbehavior, that we're going to investigate all sides of the situation. So sometimes staff and families can feel frustrated because we are going to look into both the victim side or the person being accused. And it's really important because it isn't possible for anyone to see the whole situation. And we just want to be fair to all parties involved and not to make any assumptions. Also, we are making a concerted effort to explore alternative consequences that are more effective than suspension. It's well researched that suspending kids and putting them out of school is not effective at curbing their behavior, especially the students that get suspended a lot. And then the goal in looking at those alternative consequences are, we want to make them logical and that with the goal of changing future behavior. So a lot of times that looks different than what many people think of as discipline, and it looks like kind of too easy, but again, our goal is always to change future behavior. And we're going to work tirelessly to support the success of all students in our environment. And that's just a reminder that we are a public school. Sometimes some of the feedback from families are like, why does that child go there? And we receive public funds and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that every child is successful here. And it's going to be an extreme case when we have to move to any kind of steps that make them not be a student. Okay, so these were the 3 tiers that I referred to in the beginning. And we'll go into details, but basically this tier 1, and now this is for academics and this is for behavior, and tonight we're focusing on behavior. For 80% of our students, our school-wide approach to discipline works and everything's great. And AP Renee will go into that. Then you have another 15% that need a little bit extra. And that's where our counselors come in and some behavior plans. Again, we'll go into detail. And then you have the tier 3. So the 5% of students that all of these interventions aren't working, and that's sometimes where we'll bring special ed services in. TSS is one-on-one that a student gets from outside of ICS to work with them. So I will hand it over to AP Renee to talk about our overall, the tier 1. You can go to the next slide.
Hi, everyone. So tier 1, in terms of discipline, is essentially what our classroom teachers do every day, and is more of a preventative mode. So it's things that teachers are doing to prevent misbehavior, to prevent anything from happening in the classroom. So a few things that we do here at ICS, and I think one of the most effective things is that we have a morning meeting or an advisory period every single day. And what that looks like is the class coming together with the teacher, maybe circling up, doing an activity or a share or playing a game together. And the purpose of that is really to just build a community and to make everyone feel like they belong. And it also, I like to think of it as a buffer. So we know that students come to us they come in all different moods. You know, they could have had a horrible morning, they could have woke up late and had a fight with mom. And so when they come into school, the way that they come, their mood really affects the way that their day is going to run. And so when they come in and their teacher is welcoming at them at the door, they're welcomed into the circle, they're having fun with their friends, they're having fun in general, is a really nice way to start their day, and it kind of buffers. It's a great way to start the day. I know members of the admin team are making a point to get into morning meetings this year, and I can say that anytime I visit morning meeting, it's a great way to start the day. It always brings a smile to my face to play games with the kids. It's really fun, and so this is something that builds community and helps students feel like they really belong. This is also a responsive classroom strategy. But some other responsive classroom strategies, which is generally our school-wide approach to discipline, would be teacher language. So it focuses heavily on redirecting students in a manner that is respectful and keeps their dignity intact. Another responsive classroom strategy is, like I said, the morning meeting. And also, responsive classroom focuses heavily on building relationships with students. And that's really key to preventing misbehavior. If a student knows that you love and care about them, often they will respond respectfully. Another Tier 1 support that we have in place is that we explicitly teach school-wide expectations. So not just classroom expectations, but we explicitly teach how students are supposed to behave in the cafeteria. How are you supposed to behave in the hallway? How are you supposed to behave in the bathroom? So we have a calendar, and we run through that calendar every week. I send out an email, teachers check their calendar, and we have very explicit actual lesson plans. So for example, I will say this week we are going to review our expectations on the lunchroom. And so all teachers will explicitly review, go over, here's how we behave in the lunchroom, here's what those expectations are. Because a lot of times when we see behaviors in schools, they're happening in those unstructured areas, not necessarily the classroom, but in the lunchroom, in the hallways, in the schoolyard. And so we are reviewing on a weekly basis all of those expectations throughout the school, and I think it's had a very positive effect overall on our climate. Another Tier 1 intervention is our Playworks. Playworks focuses primarily in the schoolyard on building leadership and sportsmanship, not being a sore loser. But the greatest impact is during what's called class game time. So every other week, our Playworks coach goes into the classroom, teaches games, teaches sportsmanship, teaches problem solving. Primarily problem solving is just Rochambeau, rock, paper, scissors. That's how they solve problems. And you'd be surprised how many students do that now. But the hope is that what they learn during that class game time will then carry through into the yard when they're outside playing with their friends. So it really is social skills that's focused on positive play. So these are all really preventative, but there are going to be times where students are going to need to have consequences for their behavior. And when that happens, part of responsive classroom and what we encourage is that consequences are logical and also respectful to children. And so we've created a logical consequences bank for teachers to use. Essentially what I mean by logical consequence is if you've ever heard like the punishment has to fit the crime or the crime has to fit the punishment. So for example, if a student is playing unsafe at recess and hurts somebody, they would lose the privilege to go to recess the next day. If a student goes into the bathroom and turns the water on and makes a mess all over the place, well, then they would lose the privilege to travel to the bathroom on their own and might need an escort for a week or so until they learn that they have to be responsible. So whatever it is that they do, the consequence is hope that that matches. And then these are just some of the Tier 1 professional developments that we've done so far this year with our staff. Teacher Siobhan is our organizational culture coordinator, and she has conducted trainings to help teachers recognize their own biases. We have also done trauma-based instruction training for our teachers, assistants, and NTAs. And this is basically just recognizing the effects that trauma have on student behaviors. Equitable discipline training is a training that I did with our staff at the start of the school year to just, and we'll talk a little bit about that later, but just to recognize that we have to be equitable in all areas, and that includes discipline. Playworks training for classroom assistants and NTAs. I frequently do trainings and go over Power of Our Words with our NTAs, which is basically, again, a responsive classroom tenet that talks about respectful language and how to redirect students, how to remind students of the expectations, but in a respectful manner. And also, I meet monthly with our NTAs here in the cafeteria, just troubleshoot, do trainings, things like that. So that's Tier 1. Again, Tier 1 is primarily everything that the teachers are doing to prevent behaviors from happening. I think ICS does a lot, and our teachers do an amazing job. Again, it happens and is effective for the majority of the students here at ICS. That's really all they need. However, there are students where even though we're doing all of these things, they're still not successful behaviorally. They still present challenges, whether that's in the classroom or in unstructured areas. And if we're trying all of these Tier 1 interventions and the student is still not successful, at that point we move into Tier 2. And so that would be Counselor Miriam, Counselor Ann.
Yeah. And to introduce that, we talked about the trauma-informed instruction strategies. So part of that includes furniture. So for example, having things, a lot of times students that are experiencing trauma, which could be anything, it doesn't have to just be witnessing someone getting killed. It could be going through a really difficult divorce, or another word for it is adverse childhood experiences. I don't have all the lists, but so it's a huge spectrum and it affects students in many different ways. So a big part of with students, we're trying the gamut of things with some of the students that are experiencing this. So we brought little rocking chairs because that rocking motion can really soothe some students and help them stay focused. A lot of it is just really trying to calm them and keep them focused. You know, we just recently tried with a student, we were really struggling with just this MP3 player that has music on it that corresponds with your heartbeats. And it helps him just stay calm much of the time. It obviously doesn't work all the time, and none of these things works with every child. So it's a constant, like, let's try this, and it works this day, and it didn't work this day. So it's a constant trial and error. The SST team, and we won't spend too much time on that. There is a slide. I'll let Ann and Miriam talk to that. And then the counselor and behavior plans. So, clicking. Yes.
So the student success team, or the SST, well, we call it the SST process here at ICS, but basically it's the process that we use to to collaborate as a network and to help our students that are at risk academically or behaviorally. So they're based on teacher referrals. At times, some parents are also concerned. They may call and say, I'm concerned about my child's behavior. So that may also come into play for the referral. It assists to intervene before a psychoeducation evaluation. So before, the special education coordinator is contacted, I come into place and we start the SST process. So basically, once we get the referral, the SST team, which is the principal, Principal Kristen, Teacher Jody, who is our special ed coordinator, Teacher Odamis, who is our
Achievement.
yes, our
Coordinator.
achievement coordinator, myself, and the teacher, the child's teacher. We get together, we meet, and we discuss whatever challenges the child's having, whether academic or behaviorally, and together we come up with interventions, strategies to help the child succeed. We tend to monitor, once the interventions begin, we monitor, the progress, and then we meet at around 5 weeks, 5 to 6 weeks, and we come together again and see, are these interventions working, are they not? If they're not, then we need to come up with new ones, or maybe, in fact, the child needs the evaluation, and so then Teacher Jody gives her the okay, and then we move forward with that. If the interventions work, then awesome. We continue those interventions and continue to help our students, and because obviously it's working, that's what the child needed.
Ignore that.
Okay. And so when that meeting happens, of course, parents are contacted, and they're informed, and they all know what interventions are happening at the school. And of course, if we need help from them at home, we talk to them about how they can also help their students succeed. So other tier 2 interventions, as far as Counselor Ann and I, we do a lot of small groups. And these are just some of the topics, some of the groups that we have right now, that we're running right now. We have groups for social skills. We have a sister circle, success at ICS, the COM crew, new to ICS group. That one finished, but we did have one for our kids that were new, just to get them, acclimated with our school culture, and just, for them to feel comfortable. And so we have Girl Power, Operation Intel, which is like a pro-social skills for our lower school students. The Worry Warriors, those kids that have a little bit of anxiety. Emotional regulation, managing emotions, transitioning to high school. So we run all these small groups to help our students, and these are considered tier 2
And between Miriam and I, we probably have about 60 to 70 students in those groups, and those groups flow. As soon as someone, they're usually about a 6-week, and then as soon as we feel like the students have learned what they can from that, we fade out and bring more kids in, and so that they're always needed.
Yeah, and we also, new groups are also started depending on student needs, right? So depending on our population and what we're seeing, if I see that all of a sudden I'm seeing a lot of kids one-on-one because of their divorce, then I may start a group based on that, and so we go based on the need. And
Sure, so I'm going to talk about bullying. I think this slide is mostly about the preventative things we do, which are, a lot of things fall into that. We have the groups can fall into that also, but we also have school-wide lessons that are going on in all grades from K to 8. That happens. We have a lot of special events that kind of talk about things that are anti-bullying. The morning meeting that Renee was talking about, a lot of that's circle of power, CPR, that all sort of talks about kindness. And so from a real proactive point of view, these things are happening. Another thing is we have some empowerment clubs like the Boyhood Project. We have Big Brothers Big Sisters has us matched up with Temple, where we have some of our girls, about 20 of them matched with 20 women from Temple. And I have a peer mentoring program that I run with 7th and 8th graders matched with 2nd, 3rd, and 4th graders. That serves about 40 kids. So these are things that aren't, they're not called, anti-bullying, but they all fall under that, like creating a climate of kindness, pushing those things forward. Thanks, Siobhan. I think that for me it's really important to talk about what bullying is. Bullying is intentionally aggressive behavior repeated over time between people of different levels of power. Conflict happens all the time at ICS and everywhere. Conflict is life. I think it's a really important part of life. It's how you grow. And I think that conflict here at ICS happens probably as it does elsewhere. We grab that as teachable moments. Miriam and I deal with conflict a lot of our day. It is not bullying. It's two kids coming into conflict just as two adults do. And we use those moments to teach kids how to work with conflict for the rest of their lives, hopefully. But bullying is different, and so I'm going to talk specifically about this. Go ahead, Siobhan. Yeah. So it's hard to have a bullying protocol. A lot of parents want to know like exactly what does ICS do. We have a loose protocol because it really depends on the situation. I'll say that this year I'll give a number between maybe 10 or 15 situations that have been actual. Once we've looked into it, it's been beyond conflict and it is bullying. Those 10 or 15 situations are markedly different, and it's markedly different how we handle it. We always start with the bullying situation comes to light. Either a parent has reported it or a teacher has reported it. It either comes to Kristen, Renee, me, or Miriam. We sort of sit down, talk about who's taking the lead on what. Typically, I take the lead on talking to the person who's been bullied, or Miriam would in the lower school. And then I go to Renee and say, this actually does not seem like just a conflict that I can work out. It does seem like this has been ongoing. This is repeated. There's a difference in power. Renee jumps on board and we assign consequences. We alert all the parents involved of both the child that's being bullied and the bully. If the child being bullied is ready for it, we do a conflict resolution. Sometimes they're not. I actually shouldn't say conflict resolution. I should say more of like a reconciliation. Sometimes that student doesn't want that, isn't ready for that, and we would never push that unless they truly are. I think the most important thing that we do at ICS that I haven't always seen done elsewhere is that we follow up for a very long period of time. So if a student has if we found out that a student is bullied, we will do all that stuff, but then I will meet with that person, or Miriam will meet with that student for weeks. And so I'll put them in my schedule Wednesday morning, 8 weeks, 8 weeks straight. That kid knows that I will see them once a week, and most importantly, the bully knows that I'm going to see that child once a week. So the bully is told explicitly, Counselor Ann is going to make, James come see her once a week to check on this. And that, I have rarely seen that not just absolutely squash it, because they know that it's not going to be up to this kid even to come to me. I'm going to be sort of demanding to find out what's happening, and if it continues to happen, there'll be a much more serious consequence. So I think that follow-up is key. That was it about the bullying. Are we taking questions now? No.
Oh,
I
yeah.
know someone
let's-
wanted to hear specifically about it. I don't know if you had any questions about that.
Or anything that we've already presented.
Go ahead.
So I have a couple of questions. One is, you were talking about the morning meetings and how that helps the environment. And one of the things that we've been struggling a lot with is the bus schedule. And I know this is kind of a big deal and it's been going on for a long time, but this year it has been particularly bad. And one of the conversations we had with the teacher was that she can never have a morning meeting because not all of the students are ever in class at the same time in the morning. Because of the bus schedule. So I just wanted to put it out there that, if you're talking about improving climate and, having that space of transition for the students, but there's a whole bunch of them who are coming in the bus that are never getting that opportunity to transition smoothly into the classroom. So just one of those things, and maybe how we can address this, or, as parents, what things we can do. Because many times we end up bringing the kids, but by that point they're already late anyway.
Yeah.
So any way that we can be more proactive about it would be useful to discuss.
So I think that's a good point, and it's something for us to note just about bus. They all, we're all getting into a bunch of morning meetings, and I'm seeing them happen, and I'll say most of the kids are usually there, but it's your child who's not there. They're really missing out. And it's something, I don't know as much about the bus, if we have consistent bus issues this year.
I think most of the buses arrive on time, but I don't know which bus.
And it sounds like yours is not.
Yeah.
And so that's something that we should, I'm sorry to
I
hear that.
can speak to a little bit. I can encourage you if your bus is arriving, late and consistently to reach out to the bus company directly, because we don't have control over the situation, and I know we reach out to them consistently and we don't hear back as well. So it's a frustrating.
That's why I don't have much to say, because it's
Yeah.
years, but.
Yeah.
How are the teachers trained in Wisconsin classroom? I remember that they used to be sent to trainings. Does that still happen? What percentage?
We're at 95% of our teachers have gone to a week-long training over the summer, and everyone new that we hire is.
Were there any other questions?
Yeah. So I was gonna say, I'm really happy to see that, one, teachers are definitely getting the training in that, and then also that the support staff is also getting the training, that's super important to me. So I think that they're, an integral part of
Absolutely,
the
yeah.
team. I was also gonna ask about, any other staff persons, like, other, like, auxiliary staff, well, I don't say auxiliary, but, like, for example, like, maybe like the cafeteria staff. and
Yeah, so when we're
front,
talking,
and-
when we're talking about MTAs, I think Renee can probably speak a little bit more to that, but it is, I think we learned really quickly, I mean, a lot of the things, the bumps that come up are in unstructured areas. So that's recess, that's the cafeteria, that's where conflicts and things happen, and so I think Renee, you can talk to, we've done lots of turnaround trainings with them.
But even like with the cafeteria staff and stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that for the most part, their job is redirecting students. And so knowing how to redirect students in a respectful manner is really, really important.
I'm talking about even, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but I'm talking about even, those who are just serving the stuff. Serving the
food.
students as well.
The Lincoln staff.
Exactly.
They're not our employees.
Right.
So if we have a concern, we talk to Chef Gabe, and so we have had concerns.
Yeah.
And every time they've been addressed, and most
Yeah.
often they're not.
So I guess that's why I was asking, because
Yeah.
it's interesting, you know, students they're so alert,
Yes.
they're so there, you know,
Yeah.
and they're aware and awake, and they noticed instantly, they were like, oh, I remember last guy, he was so nice. There's new people now, you know, and they're just expressing how they feel.
Well, it's
about
good-
the way
it's
that
good.
they're-
And I imagine maybe you already reached out about that, but it's good for us, sometimes there's things that don't occur to us, and I mean, I think we knew right away when our staff was all trained in it, that it was important that the MTAs were. But I think that, you know, it's something I think we've even pulled in, you know, front office and everywhere else to just get the basics of the training to know that we're all on the same page. So, in any case, when someone's not our employee, it's also the same, you know, our TSS workers are employed, we haven't had problems with language with them, I don't think, but they're not employed by us either. It's hard for us to put, that sort of thing when we don't, we're not their bosses. But we can definitely encourage, and if you brought that to our attention, I'm sure we would.
Okay.
That particular person. Oh, go ahead.
So I was excited to hear about the trauma informed awareness and in that way. The fidgets that have been given to the classrooms. I was so excited about this,
Yes.
and you mentioned that to a couple of teachers. This is really good. And how do you feel about the buy-in of teachers to those kind of adaptations? Rocking chairs, squeezers.
I think the most controversial one is the fidgets, but I think, and again, it's always.
I loved them, by the way. I was like,
Yeah,
they're great.
and a lot of people embrace it, it's just that so by fidgets, they mean those things that you can, and occupy your hands so that you convey more attention. That's very good for kids that struggle with paying attention or that are anxious. It sounds so crazy, but it's like you have to find the right fidget for the right child. And so there's those balls with the spikes on it that provide a lot of sensory input, feedback, but then they also can go flying across the room. So I think, again, this is our first time implementing it. Some of the things I've talked about with Jody is giving more time to teach teachers how to introduce it to their class and how to use them effectively. You know, I just sent out an email, it said Rubik's Cubes aren't fidgets because they're focusing on a puzzle, they can't pay attention to you if they're focusing on a puzzle. So increasing training for teachers, and then again, getting to know your students to know that this fidget's going to end up flying across the room, this fidget really works for the student. In my observations, I'll say, this student was using the fidget really appropriately. It looked like it was helping her pay attention. the two kids over here were playing with Play-Doh and not looking at you, you know, so.
And I think it's also,
Training, I think.
yeah, it's ongoing training that we're having, and it's really new, and it's counterintuitive to a lot of
Yeah.
people, that you would give a student who wasn't struggling to pay attention something that would then seem like it's even, so I think that, I think, absolutely, so we all know that, and I think, but I think, so I'm just, I think it's, I think there is buy-in for sure, and I think our feedback from the instructor who taught us was really powerful about how our school, of all the schools he goes to, and I don't know if it's okay for me to share that, but of all the schools he goes to and does these trainings with, he came and did a lot of observations post, introducing this idea, and that it was remarkable how well we were doing with it. So I think there is buy-in, but I think that there is, the fidgets, yeah, probably a little controversial, but everyone's on board and getting more and more on board. And they see it working.
And then will we continue on that? Because there's so much more.
Yes. We started pretty intensely this year, but it's gonna, that's what sort of, I feel like it's the theme of the year, a lot of professional development this year.
Go ahead. I have a question regarding the intervention and the counseling groups. We had our son, meeting with Counselor Gate when he was around, and there was some sort of plan drawn, and then never heard him back, and then all of a sudden he wasn't anymore. But there was just not communication around, so what's the plan that was happening? We had a couple of really good communications, like email and meeting, and then nothing else. And then we heard that Counselor Miriam came. He was very excited to meet with Counselor Miriam, our son. And then that was it. I never heard back whether he was done. Apparently those meetings ended, or I don't know.
I think that, when you have
So I know there's flow, you were saying
Yeah.
some kids stay and some, but I just never.
Well, I
heard back.
over the summer, I can't speak to where Counselor Gate was at that point, but I think in the transition from one counselor to the other, if you haven't heard anything, so last year you should have heard communication, but I can't really speak to that specifically. If you haven't heard anything this year, it's probably because he's fine and no one has recommended for him to see.
So that's what I want to
Yeah.
assume, but
In general-
it would be just good to know
Yes.
so that
In
we're
general,
worrying about that
we-
and then how that happens.
Yes, in general, Miriam will, and will let the parent know that they're meeting with once a week, and this is the focus. And this is the plan of when they enter or exit. But sometimes maybe something falls through the crack, it happens, but in general, that's the plan, that's the counselor's plan.
Yeah, and I would just encourage you to reach out.
Yeah.
Reach out to
Right.
teacher, counselor, principal, anybody.
To see what's happening.
And I'm conscious about getting to that last about the tools, I see everybody's heads nodding, so definitely want to talk about Tier 3, but this is for the 5% of students, perhaps the students that you need a tool to talk to your child about, how, they come home and they say, this child did this, and I can't believe they talked to the teacher that way. So we try many things, and these are some of them. Teacher Nikki, who's our student support specialist, a lot of these things you may not know about, and it's because your students haven't been recommended or aren't in Tier 3. The TSS is an outside support, so families go through to behavioral health services, and then they have someone that comes in and is able to be with them all day in a one-on-one situation. Usually it's about at most 15 hours a work week. It's rarely all day. Special education services, behavior plans, so we have students that have specific goals, and then they can have maybe teacher Siobhan is who they check in with to get her to see how they're doing and if they're getting rewarded. This year, something that we're trying is our crisis, we have a crisis plan for some students and crisis boxes, so students that are really hard to de-escalate or are very upset often, have a little box that has things that might de-escalate them. And one of the things that we're learning about is that then they might look at that stuffed bunny as a reward, so now we have to figure out how to give them that stuffed bunny when they're not in crisis, but you live and learn. And then teacher Jody introduced this year for the first time Comfort Caring Canine. So we had some, actually you can speak to it quickly so we can.
Sure. It's a volunteer organization in the Philadelphia area that brings in therapy dogs to schools, hospitals, nursing homes, etc. So I reached out to them, and we had our first monthly visit in the beginning of March. Because of PSSA at the beginning of April, we're going to have our April visit towards the end of the month. But we have a target group of students who get to interact and have time with the dogs.
And seeing their interactions made us wish we could do it more often because it really is that animal, like what animals can do for some people. Okay, Teacher McKee is not going to go over this whole slide, but.
Hi, I'm Nikki. I won't, in lieu of time, I'm just going to briefly go over this, and if you have any questions, you can ask afterwards. So I work with that 5% of the student population, and in my work, I have either individual or group meetings with them, and some of the groups are either self-esteem, anger management, conflict resolution, which is big, and those are with students that may or may not have a clinical diagnosis. I also attend home visits with families, so if they're looking to get behavioral health services for their child, I will attend the appointments with them. A lot of the parents are new to that process, so I walk them through it and I help them advocate for their child for the services that they need. A lot of times, if they have private insurance, there's a loophole that they can go through to still access those services for their child. So I help them through that. I do a lot of peer-to-peer mediations with students that are not on my caseload as well. So just say something occurs that's connected to a student that I work with in some way. I'll meet with them and do that as well. Also, I've been doing some parent and child restorative meetings. So I'm not sure if you've heard of restorative practices, but it's basically a way to connect people in our disconnected world. So it teaches empathy, and it's guided questioning that's open-ended, where by the end of that process, they're able to come up with a solution on how they can move forward positively. And I've done the same thing with students and teachers, which is working really well. I've done small groups where it's one child and the teacher, and most recently I've been doing some of the advisory groups, so a full classroom with the teacher if their whole group if they're having issues. And I've done some parent-to-parent ones, so just say the child goes home and they're complaining about X person did this and the parent is up in the tizzy, and I get both parents together and we do this same restorative process with the children involved. Sometimes it may, the parents may just be, it may be the 3 of us or the 4 of us, depending if both parents come, but we do that same process. So that's what I do in a nutshell. Are there any questions?
I'm just going to breeze through this a little bit. This just tells you our overall population of students with disabilities, and the number. When this was made, it was about 98 students, and we had 11 students that display behaviors of concern. So that's roughly about 10% of the population of students with disabilities. But when we have 11 students compared to 800 in the whole school, that's actually a very small percentage of students that have behaviors that impede their learning. And when I talk about behaviors, it doesn't necessarily mean disruptive behaviors in the classroom environment, although some students do have those behaviors. It can be something like students aren't turning in homework or completing classwork, or they have inattentive or impulsive behaviors in the classroom that are affecting themselves. So it's not always disruptive to the entire school environment. These are just some of the disabilities that are represented with our students who have those behaviors that impede their learning. These are all acronyms for other health impaired with ADHD, autism, emotional disturbance, specific learning disability, and speech language impairment. Yeah, this is on the side the number of students who have those disabilities, their primary or secondary disability, and this is just the students that have behaviors that impede their learning. So these are some of the interventions that we have done this year. For some of those students, we've hired additional staff, personal care attendants, paraprofessionals. We also have additional bus aides. on the buses for students who have behaviors on the buses too. We hired an additional special education teacher here. We've added more assistive technology to give students access who may be having difficulty writing. They're allowed to type versus write, so which will help decrease some behaviors. We've modified curriculum, school hours. For some students, they don't attend a full day of school. And we also provide alternate report cards for students who don't have access to the general education curriculum. Our speech language therapist does social stories with a wide range of students now. She's very proactive in that. We do functional behavior assessments, so we target specific behaviors of students. So if we have a student who might be calling out repeatedly in class, we do observations to see what's happening to right before that behavior to trigger that behavior, and then what's the consequence that's keeping that behavior, maintaining that behavior. And so what we do is we manipulate, or we try to manipulate what happens before so it's not triggered at all, which comes into play with the positive behavior support plan for those students, where we identify the triggers so that we can not have those triggers happen, and then we also teach those students replacement behaviors to do instead of, calling out what's a better way to use your communication versus calling out, raise your hand, things like that. We add related services, so additional OT and speech, and we also have been doing a lot of reevaluations this year, so some student who is showing increased behaviors, maybe they weren't identified correctly, or maybe their disability has changed, so we reevaluate their psychoeducational evaluation to see if there's something else that we may have missed in the past. Okay, so this is mostly, I talked about that positive behavior support plan where we find the triggers and then play with those. So that addresses that, what's in the students' IEPs. So disciplinary processes for students with IEPs, you can go to the next slide actually. What's important for you to know is that students with disabilities who have some of these behaviors, they are protected under federal law IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So a lot of parents may write in and say, why is this student still in school? It's because we receive those federal funds and they are identified as a student with a disability. And because of that, there's special disciplinary process that we have to go through. This talks a little bit about that. So also students who are identified with disabilities, but also those students who are going through the process where we're not really sure if they are truly, if they do truly have that disability or not, if they're thought to have that disability, they're also protected under that umbrella of IDEA. So a student who has a disability, they cannot necessarily have a change of placement. This talks about what a change of placement is for those students. So 10 or more days, consecutive school days of suspension, more than 15 cumulative school days of suspension. If there's a pattern between days 11 and 15, for a student with an intellectual disability, which is the new terminology for a student who, formerly they called it mental retardation, they're not allowed to be suspended from school even for one day. And then 45 days would be considered a change of placement for a student who has brought in drugs, a weapon, or seriously bodily injury. Yeah, so basically what's important for you to know is that a student with a disability, it's very, very difficult to have that student expelled because of the laws that they're protected by.
I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, it's a question, I think. I think that as the students get older, and I'm thinking more between like that grade of like 3 to 5, they start to become more aware of everyone else around them, and they start noticing, the differences between them and other students, and and then I think as they start to also hear some of the language that we also use as adults to define, like what's happening with each of our students, some of them kind of internalize it and they see it in a certain way, especially for students that are very literal. So I actually have a habit of mostly saying learning difference as opposed to disability, because the word disability itself has, it's this, which is not, and then ability, which means it cannot do something, as opposed to it being like, no, you can do, but it's just done differently for you. I think that, and I don't want to speak for every student in the building, but I know specifically for my son, really helping him to understand that he has a different way of learning and a different way of understanding the world and a different way of being able to express himself is important, because their self-esteem is really, I don't know, I just think that it has an impact on self-esteem. So is there certain language that we use with the students when we're talking about?
That's one of the things, that leads into what you're going to talk about, right?
I mean, I say disability because that's what the law
Right, I
speaks
understand.
to, and that's the
Yeah.
language
Yeah.
that I use in my,
Yeah.
field. But when we're speaking largely to students, I would probably say we do not use the word disability
Okay,
in that.
yeah, that's what I wanted to know, and I just wanted to make sure that, like, I'm mirroring, what's already.
Sure.
How many TSSs do you have in the school compared to the support staff that you were listing up there? Is it like 2, 1-to-1 that were hired by the school?
So I'm not sure, I don't encompass the TSS workers, that's for Teacher Nikki, and they're not our employees either.
I know.
So I don't know how many TSS there are.
would say currently there are 3.
Okay, so it's kind of even.
So, yeah, we have 3 paraprofessionals.
Because those TSSs might be harder and harder to come by.
Yes. Which is why we might have some of our, again, we try to protect the learning of all students, and sometimes the process is so cumbersome and unjust that we have to do it ourselves.
I was just going to make a comment about that. I work for community behavioral health, and not that I could go in anyone's case and look at a case like that. I actually work with adults, but I do go to the grievances where parents are asking for more services, and it's just such a great way. I do see a lot of the school and kids situations there, and I definitely would like to talk to you about different services that are available.
Amazing.
And there's even like a group of like a woman who works there who does like grandparents raising kids, that like a peer group, and so it's really great. And there's lots of case management, and the Sleepy Wheel gets the grease.
Yes, that's what we basically say, and it's a shame, and some families just feel so disenfranchised that they're like, there's nothing I can do, and that's why it's kind of like, you're gonna call him every day, and I'm gonna sit next to him, you're gonna call him every day, and we'll raise, anyway, I don't wanna get sidetracked.
I know services, like there's a lot of them out there, but they're not always so great. And,
Yes.
so I could maybe help, I've learned a little bit there, so.
That would be great, yeah.
And sometimes the parents are just so overwhelmed that
Yes.
they can't necessarily even get to the outside
Yes,
support
and that's
that
why
they
we
need.
have Teacher McKee. I mean, honestly, we're lucky that we don't have a huge population, so we really can do a lot to affect change in the lives of many of these students. But so much of it is helping the parents not give up, and how to manage all the bureaucracy, and how to understand that if you just sit back and wait for them to take care of it, it won't happen.
But according to IDEA, the school cannot help in the TSS.
We don't.
Right.
We can recommend it.
You can recommend it, but no parent can be required to.
No,
Correct.
we do not.
Any other questions for me?
Okay, so then that leads to, sorry.
So I just want to go back to when we talked about Tier 1 supports and some professional development that we've done with teachers. And one of the things that kind of to start the year on the right foot and in the right mindset was a professional development that I did with teachers just about cultural proficiency and about what that means in terms of discipline. And so we don't really need to go through this slide because it's very jargony. But in terms of being culturally competent educators, what does it mean in terms of being a teacher, of being an administrator, and working with students? It means that we intentionally take into account the socio-political issues that affect students and their families at each stage of their lives. So what does that mean? That means that we recognize each and every day that students come to us having experienced divorce, having experienced the stress that poverty brings, that mom is working all the time and that she is exhausted when she comes home and that she's not doing homework with you tonight, that children have experienced trauma, that the divorce of a parent, an incarcerated parent, is a traumatic experience for children. So we're not saying, as an institution, that we're going to treat all children the same. We're not. We're going to be equitable in our approach and get to know each student and what they're doing. So our commitment for this school year that I wanted to share with teachers is to transform some of those traditional practices, discipline practices, in a way that is culturally competent. So you can go ahead. So what does this mean in terms of discipline? In terms of discipline, it means that we want to have culturally responsive discipline practices here at ICS. So what we've started to do is to institute interventions and accommodations for students who require them, so that they can achieve just as well as students who are not experiencing these traumatic events, or students who don't have learning disabilities. And part of that approach was our trauma training, and recognizing that, well, this student might need a fidget to pay attention and do just as well as this student over here who does not need that. Or this student may need a positive behavior support plan in order to be successful as the student sitting next to her, and that's what we're going to do. We're not going to push students out of the school. We're not going to suspend kids over and over and over and over again if we know that that's not effective. I can suspend him 10 times and he will come back and exhibit those same behaviors. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to look to see what interventions and accommodations we can put in place to help this child be successful here at ICS. And that includes upward spiral conversations. What that means is, rather than blaming the child, oh, he's lazy, rather than blaming the parent, she doesn't care, doesn't even do homework with her, we take a step back and we ask ourselves, what can we do? Yes, there are all these socio-political, socioeconomic challenges that this child is facing. We need to recognize it, and we need to say to ourselves, what can we do? Yes, we have no control over that, but what can we do each and every school day to help these children be successful here at ICS? And again, that's striving to eliminate the disproportionality that occurs, yes, here at ICS, and at pretty much every school across the nation, that our students with IEPs, that our African American boys are being suspended at really high rates, and we need to address that. And part of the way to address that is to make sure that our discipline practices here at ICS are equitable. And this was just, you've probably seen it. I know you've all seen it. This is just kind of a visual that I talk to teachers about, in terms of, it's not really about treating all children the same. It's about giving every child what they need. And some children need more than others. And our responsibility in terms of discipline is to put some of these things in place, whether those are tier 2 supports in terms of counseling groups, behavior plans, or tier 3 supports. Maybe they need a TSS worker, whatever it is that they need to be as successful as this child, it's our responsibility to put that in place. And so that was really the tone that I wanted to set for this school year, and the trauma-informed training and all of the things subsequent to that. And the hope is that we're giving our teachers the tools that they have so that they can create equitable and an equitable environment for these students. And so, again, going back to the suspension rates, we want to prevent that from happening, and in order to prevent that, we have to put more supports in place for our students. And so the trauma-informed practices are some supports. Our tier 2 supports, our tier 3 supports, we're really trying hard this year to get to this place.
Do we do anything to help our students understand this visual, and this, because that's, I think, something that our students and our parents a lot of times
Yes.
don't get.
And that's what's gonna, that with
Okay.
Siobhan and Jenny will
Yeah,
speak to.
and I think you do, but before we, that's why I raised my hand, please, I was gonna say, yeah, because I could see a third slide where they're actually holding each other up, you know, but, how are you feeling? Is it too soon to say if you're feeling things are working?
Yeah, I was gonna.
Are we, is it competition? So
This
I
is-
understand a lot of it.
This is the way that I
We started
always,
talking about trauma last year, remember, that's right, or maybe last fall. I can't remember.
one of the things that I, it was last fall, I think, but it's really hard, you know, so many people want data. What does the data show, right? And so much, especially with our students that are experiencing trauma and that teacher that we work with, it's like, yeah, did that student, was that student's mother home last night? Because that, I'm gonna do whatever I can when she's here, but so much of the fluctuation of behavior can happen with the stability or lack thereof at home too. So I think that it's working. I think it's helping our student, I think it's helping many students. It's not always 100% effective, and I think that we're still learning, yeah. But I don't know that we'll ever get to say, yes, you know, we increased our, you know, who says who's experiencing trauma or not, and so I don't know by numbers if you can tell, but I think it's making our teachers much more understanding.
In general, like the climate is
Yeah.
really.
And also, you being here is really helpful because you're so right. I mean, just today, we met with specialist teachers talking about, kids will say, well, how come he gets to listen to music and I don't, right? And then you have that eyeglass conversation. Well, she needs glasses and you don't. So why would you want a pair of glasses if you don't need it? You don't need it. And it's important, though, to have those conversations because kids are big with fairness, right? It's not fair. He gets it and I don't. And it comes back to like that equity piece where he has this because he needs this to be as successful as you are without it. And that's important to talk to kids about that because they will come home and they will ask and they say it to teachers all the time. And so those conversations absolutely must be had with children, and that's what Siobhan's going to address.
Yeah, I was gonna ask the same thing, but I was gonna ask in terms of gauging it from how the teachers feel about it.
I could probably talk about that too, because I'm a teacher here as well.
Yeah, so let's hand it over to you.
All right.
So holding each other up, but Kristen looked at me. My third one is liberation, where there's a wall that is either clear or gated or no wall at all. So I feel like this is awesome. And then there's another one where, you know, we all have exactly what we need and the options are all open. So I want to answer these two questions before I talk about, I'm going to talk about how I talk to students about equity and fairness as an educator, and maybe you could use some of those things. And Teacher Jenny is going to talk about her experience as a parent, talking to her student when that body goes home. Does that make sense? So teachers, I think, so I'm dance and movement teacher, and I'm also the organizational culture coordinator to ask us if we're sticking to our mission, if our policies match our relationships, all of those like lofty things, are they really getting into the fibers of what we're doing? As an educator here, I feel like the conversations are shifted, right? We know that we cannot talk in open spaces about students and their details. There's a lot more respect for our student bodies and not like this kid is doing this and I'm tired of this. We have our frustrating moments, but now we know we need to spiral it up. And I hold people accountable. Like, people know they can't really come to me and talk negatively about a kid for too long because then it feels terrible as an educator. So I feel like we're holding each other accountable and we know the expectation. Nobody wants to be that person anymore where we're just complaining. That doesn't feel like the ICS that we're trying to grow into existence, right? So I think as an educator, I feel that pressure, which is exciting. I'm the person that was like, fidgets, no! Because I'm hypersensitive, and I'll talk about that in a second. Like, these lights are way too much for me. I ate pizza, there's like sugar running through me, so the fidgets like, I probably need a weighted blanket for sure, because this is why,
It's like a sauna.
my office is a sauna, it is, and it's dark, whatever. Like, I know how to tend to myself now. I did it when I was younger. I'll talk about that in a second. So, what was I saying? So I'm like, hear all the clicks, hear all the noise, but even us, fidget teachers, we're like, well, whatever we need to do. because it's not about us. We signed up for this. It's about the babies. It's about the little bodies. What do we need to do to step up for that? It's not about me. So I feel like there is rumblings. Some of us are waterfalls gushing. Some of us are like dewdrops. You know, change for all of us is different. So I think that that is happening. But it is happening. Does that answer your question? I feel it.
Yeah,
I feel it.
Yes, I'm thinking that it has.
And I'm the organizational culture coordinator at ICS. That never existed before. Like, I'm like, we need to talk about race, we need to talk about gender, we need to talk about identity. So I think that is pretty progressive. We have a, what are you again? A what? Student support specialist, like somebody that goes to, there's a lot of names. You know, I know who she is, but I think of her as student support. She will go to appointments with parents to process that, to understand medication. I think that's significant. Yeah, that's big. So I think if once administration says this is important and then their support goes this way, we meet each other in the middle. So what I want to do, I want to talk about how I talk about difference. But before we do that, I want you to venture into your memory. I want you to, if you want to, you can close your eyes. I'm going to be really quick. You don't have to if you don't want to. Your choice. I'm going to close my eyes. I want you to think about a moment when you did something or said something that was terribly inappropriate or bad. It was seen as a bad thing based on that environment you were in. It was considered terribly inappropriate in language and action. I want you to think about the bodies that language or behavior affected. How old were you? How would you talk about that experience now? I invite you to open your eyes, if you had them closed. And I just want you to think about that moment where you were considered bad or inappropriate. If you feel super brave and okay about it, I would love to hear that. I will share one of mine. I was a super emotional kid. I still am really emotional. And I screamed and yelled and cried a lot. My expression of all of my feelings came out like this, and yelling. And my mom would tell me she let me yell because she knew I wasn't yelling at her. And I think this happened from like 0 to 17. 17, I kind of like balanced out. But that feels like a super like, my grandmother put me out of the house one time. She told me I couldn't come back in until I learned how to talk to adults. And I was at the door like, I know I'm being terrible, but I can't change it. I don't know how to change it. Anyone have one? A bad thing that you feel brave enough to share? You don't have to. You stole a car. So, you went blank? You couldn't remember a bad thing? So this is one thing that we say in dance and movement. A bad moment does not make for a bad person. A bad moment does not make you a bad kid. If you're having an irritated moment, if you're having a grumpy moment, if you're having a hungry moment, some of our moments, I teach from kindergarten to 5th grade, some of our moments last from kindergarten to 5th grade, right? But then I get to see them in 8th grade and like, oh my goodness. Like the change is amazing, but the first thing that I really stress in dance and movement, and pretty much I feel like everyone that I talk to, is that your moment, it could be a day, it could be a Monday, it does not color all of who you are. So there's a generosity for yourself and a generosity for your classmates. This child, this student might be having a bad moment, but it doesn't make them a bad kid. So we want to think about how we talk about their experience, how we talk about what they've demonstrated. Does that make sense? The second thing, I have them written down because I know it. Okay. The other thing that I say is when you're making mistakes, it's an example of you learning, right? You cannot learn without making mistakes. And I like to use the example of riding a bike. Some of us might jump on a bike and be like, I got this, right? But a lot of us have to go a little bit too far to the left and then go a little bit too far to the right to figure out how to get back on balance. And I feel like kids understand that. Skateboarding, roller skating, if you give them a physical activity the body doesn't just, biggest one, we're the only creatures that really come out and can't do anything. We come out and we're like this. Right, super mushy, and we can't really do anything. A horse will come out and be like, right? We're the only things that it takes us so much time to, and when you use things like that with little people, fish come out, They're moving. We don't have that. We don't have that. So we have to make mistakes. And so we say learning equals mistaking equals lifing. The way that you really know that you're living, you're trying and you're messing up. And they understand that. So if you try something, especially in my class when we're doing risky things all the time, kids don't know how to jump rope. They're playing video games. Get those kids out jumping rope. So they try to jump and they're like, oh, I can't. Of course you can. You didn't come out jumping rope. You have to actually practice it. So we say learning equals mistaking equals lifing. Does that make sense? So my third one is learning takes time, right? Some of us can tie our shoes in kindergarten. Some of us can't tie them until 3rd grade. Should we feel terrible about that? Absolutely not. I want you to think about something that you learned just like that. Give me a thumbs up when you have it. I just want to make sure that you're here. Because I know we're flowing around other places. Can I have some examples of something you learned just, I'll give you an example of myself. I'll be vulnerable first. Parallel parking, I got it. I didn't start learning to drive until I was 25, and someone taught me my first parallel park. I was like, I know how to do this. And I'm a New Yorker. So small spots, I see them, I'm like, I'm excited. I get into that. I learned it just like that. Tell me something you learned really quickly. Water skiing, braiding hair. Anybody else? Directions. Oh, terrible. I can't. Yeah, I can't. I want you to think about something that took you a super long time to do. Like you are still learning how to do that. I'll give an example. My hair. It took me a really long time to figure out how to be in a relationship with it. The product situation, like the blend, whether, if it's superhuman, what should I do? What took me a really long time, I just turned 40, deep self-acceptance and self-confidence. That is a super long thing. Some people might come up like, I got this. It took me a long time to learn that. What was something that took you a long time to do?
I was going to say Gisella's hair.
Gisella's
I'm
hair.
going to say braiding Pippa's hair.
Yes.
I just gave up. I kind of did too. I should keep trying.
So here's, right? And so, look, I am a 40-year-old woman. It took me a really long time. I'm just going to do side note. Side note why it's going to take her a long time because the world is not accepting of this and also not in information of this. Now we are. You on YouTube, how to do natural curl hair, how to do, that's new, right? So you're going to have an easier time than I did because I was in 2nd grade. My mom was like, no, I'm not doing this anymore. So you're not the only one I gave up. But there's just some things that take us a long time. And I encourage you to talk to your little people about trees. It takes them a really long time to grow. It takes us a really long time to learn. I can tie my shoelaces without looking now, but it took me a long time to figure that out. So bad moments don't make us bad people. Learning includes mistaking. Learning takes time. This is my favorite one. Different is different. Different is not wrong. Different is different. You're a little person that learns differently. Whatever that experience is, we are practicing. Different is different. So the person goes home and says, a kid goes home and says, such and such had a tantrum, and I was irritated. I understand why you were irritated. I wonder what was going on for them. What were they responding to? I wonder if they were having a challenging day or they were hungry. What can we think about could be possible reasons for something like that happening that are not always about that kid coming from a terrible home, right? That is why I feel strongly about like training our little people to speak in a global way, that I was the shouting, crying kid because I didn't know how to manage my body. I didn't know that if I stood next to Nikki, who is a sad kid, I was going to go home feeling sad because I'm super sensitive about that and have that expression happen on everybody else. But now, as an adult, I don't roll around with the sad people. Right? I don't watch the super violent movies because I come out like, what's wrong with me? I didn't know that, but it took me a little bit of time to figure that out. So you can have conversations with, like, my home was pretty good. I thank my mom every time I see her, right? Because she loved me delicately and fiercely, and she let me be myself, but I know I was a lot. And I was probably the kid that your kids are going home talking about, and I'm fantastic. and it's what makes me a really empathetic teacher. pressure is because I understand the tantrum when we don't have the ability to communicate. Are you giving me time?
No, I'm giving you, I just think that one of the things that Siobhan said that was really important is that I think it's easy to lean on as parents, like, oh, I mean, you don't know what's going on in the kid's house, and like, put it on. If that's a huge assumption that we make, is like, this student's having a really bad day, and like, put it on, well, you know, maybe he doesn't get, I think it's an easy thing for us to jump to things like, maybe he doesn't, you know, eat as well as you, or his parents can't give him the things that we give him. Like, we sort of, I think that's the quick, easy thing to say, and I think it sets your kid up for a really twisted way of thinking. I don't think, and I think that's the case a lot of the time, is that kid, I think talking about different is different, or a bad moment, and saying the same response, giving you, and not relying on who knows what's going on at their home.
Right.
That's like planting these really big seeds that are often can be racist and a lot of other things, and so just being careful about how you're responding when your kid comes home. I think the moments are really big for me as a parent, also just speaking to that. You know, they had a bad moment.
It doesn't define all of, we don't get to add adjectives to them. And I want to speak to, thank you, Anne, for that. I just lost it. Remember that time you were irritated with mommy and then you took it out on your sister and it had nothing to do with your sister? We don't know, like, sometimes that happens. Kids come in, like, talking to them like they're us. You come in with all of these experiences and emotions. We don't know what was going on for that kid at all, right? But you've had a similar experience. At that time, I didn't get you that thing that you wanted, and you went to school and had that terrible day, and then we had to talk about it. Like, they are full creatures. And sometimes we wake up grumpy. I tell them Teacher Siobhan is a dragon and a bunny, and sometimes I'm super fiery and I'm trying to work on it. And I'm like, I'm sorry, it's my dragon. I'm working. They have similar experiences. When you lash out, they're going to lash out at some point as well. Does that make sense? Yeah. I have a little activity to give you to do with them, but I want to give Jenny some time because I know time is valuable. Any questions? Okay.
Hello. This really just complements everything Siobhan has said, but from a purely parent perspective. I started out as I was just going to do kind of a mock conversation I might have, but it'll come as a surprise to nobody that then I really wanted to make clear what the goals are of that conversation, so I'll specify those too. So at home, a couple times a week, very purposefully, during dinner or whatever, we ask those questions that are more than just like, how was your day? Because everybody knows you don't get any answers from that. So then we ask the questions of like, what happened today that was hilarious? Did someone do something kind today? Did something really stressful happen today? With the goal that we're going to get her talking about stuff. And you really do find out the most interesting things from questions like that. And so if something comes up that was difficult or stressful, we ask, well, what was that like? To again get her talking more about it, and also to buy us time to think about what we're going to say. And so, a conversation might go like, if I said, "Does something stressful happen today?" She might say, "Yeah, so and so had a really hard time during math." Whoa, what was that like? What happened? Well, she kept knocking down the blocks. We couldn't build the three-dimensional shape we were supposed to build. And the teacher made her leave the table or go to take a break, and she got really mad and screamed and kicked a chair. That, things like that happen. So, again, it's sort of like, oh, what was that like? What were you thinking when that happened? Let her talk about it. And then, when it's kind of our turn to talk, we always start by framing the behavior as a struggle, there was some kind of struggle for that student. So what was, like, oh wow, something must have been going on that was really hard for her. It sounds like she was having a really hard time controlling herself. And then we kind of suggest some reasons for it, gently. And you'll notice there's a lot of our talking uses a lot of like, it seems like, or I wonder, or maybe. Sometimes, so that we're putting the ideas out there, but we're letting the child sort of process them for herself and say, yes, that sounds right, or no, I don't think that doesn't.
So that just helps her kind of be in control as we're giving these suggestions. So, it might be something like, I wonder if she was frustrated because she didn't understand what the assignment was. Or maybe she had just had an upsetting interaction with another student and was still really simmering about that and couldn't focus on the lesson. And then we kind of take it to the above and beyond step where you're acknowledging, yeah, that was a tough situation, and it can be okay to stop there, but if you want to keep going, you can say, it's so hard to know what can be helpful in those situations. Do you want our thoughts about it? And she might say no. Like sometimes it's just, no, I don't really want to talk about it anymore. And you've done enough to let her share and to just kind of empathize with that. But if they do want thoughts on it, that's where you get those sometimes or maybes. And so we might say something like, maybe it would be, do you feel like you could have asked her, like, if she needed help before it reached that point? Did you have a chance to ask her? Is there anything I can help you with? Or also, we'd like to talk about kind of being kind, but also being assertive and standing up for yourself. Because being kind and accepting the fact that it's hard for that student doesn't mean just letting that student walk all over you, too. So you might try saying, I'd really like to be able to work on this right now. Please stop knocking it down. Just straightforward, not angry with them, not blaming them, not with a threat that you're going to tell the teacher. Just, this is what we need to be doing right now. Let's work on it together. Stop knocking it down. And then you might say, well, and if that doesn't work, then yeah, you might still have to ask the teacher to help you. But again, it's not in that, I'm telling the teacher. It's the, hey, our group is having some trouble right now. Could you check on us?
And we are always ready to chat.
Right.
The teachers are always ready.
Exactly. So, and then kind of the really next level, which I do try to push it because I do, if my child's feeling it, if the conversation's going that way, if she's into the talk, I do feel a responsibility to try to support her in what ways I can to be a leader in terms of being kind and being, making people feel like they're welcome in the community. So while acknowledging that this is really, really, really difficult and telling her it's completely okay if she's not ready to do it, we might throw a suggestion in there like, a lot of times this is the same student who's knocking over the blocks. It's a student who's come up in conversation before that not all the kids are nice to this student. It's not a surprise that the student wants to knock over the blocks because someone just told that student to shut up a few minutes ago and that she was always annoying them. So that then comes where we talk about like, maybe you could just really, I know the student isn't your particular best friend in class, but maybe you could just make a point of really saying hello in the morning, giving that student a really nice smile, and bring up something that she likes to talk about, so you can have a little short conversation. And then I always throw in, that's something that I would have loved to be able to do when I was young. I was not confident enough to do it. It's really, really hard. I don't know if you can do it, and it's okay if you can't. It's a really brave and courageous thing to do. I couldn't do it myself. And that's the secret challenge for them, right? They're like, wait, my mom couldn't do it? I can do this. And yes, we always use that language that Siobhan was talking about. Whatever it is that if they're not doing it yet, it's because it's not easy for them right now. They haven't had as much practice as you, or they need more practice than you do because everybody has their different strengths and gifts. So everybody's working on it. Everybody's on a journey. And our job is to just help each other get there. And so then final thing I'll say about this is we're having any kinds of conversations like these, we have 3 basic goals of that conversation. 1 is building empathy and understanding in our students. 2 is encouraging them to take compassionate and confident action. in situations, what are you going to do? And what are you going to do to be kind? And what are you going to do to make sure that you're also sticking up for your own needs? Everybody's needs to be met. And finally, this is kind of like the big goal, which should always be there, is doing it all in a way that makes them want to bring it up again with you the next time it comes up. You want to keep those conversations open and those lines of communication open, which is why we use so much language of, do you want to talk more about this? Or it seems like, or I wonder. And it can be really hard. I definitely struggled. When my child came home the first time in first grade, talking about how there were clubs at recess, and there were clubs you could be in and clubs you couldn't be in, I jumped straight to, what? You better not be making a club. You better not. And I was like, whoa, that's not going to be helpful for anyone, right? Right, I had to like dial it down, had to be like, so what's going on with these clubs? Have you ever been in a club? What, right? And so you really, you keep it all, you let them talk about what they're ready to talk about, you make it clear that you're open, and that you don't have the answers. Everything that the things we ask them to do are really, really hard. They were probably too hard for us when we were their age, and we tell them about instances where it was too hard for us. And we make it clear that we don't have the answers, and we're just trying to figure it out.
I would say that secret bucket really still works with my 11 and 12. Really does. I'm amazed I still can't get it. With the question? Well, I'll be like, I know it's really hard because I do a lot of that. Like I can, and it still kind of gets a good reaction. Yeah, 100%, but then I kind of respond to, oh, okay. Those are my 11-year-old.
Yeah, it doesn't stop
Maybe
after
we're
third
trying,
grade or
I'm
fourth
just
grade.
like, talk to. But I always see those little kids working, but it seems to, at least in the middle school.
I do it with the kids, like this is, what I'm asking you to do is really risky and really scary. Most of the adults in the room, in the building couldn't do the movement or be creative the way that I'm asking to, and I'm challenging you to be better than Teacher Siobhan. Like take my example and then,
that it works.
And it works, they're like,
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I would say thank you guys so much, really. I hope that parents do that. I will say please meeting. I keep putting these darn volunteer sign-ups down. Most of you guys are on it, but if you are interested in doing something with the option, like what you want to helping our food or games or anything, sign up, I'll email you. Or you'll just be getting general emails.